Welcome, my queens, to another episode. Have a special guest with me today. I'm going to read her bio to you. I should have actually checked, Shelly, before we go into this. How do I say your surname? Is it Najjar?
Yes.
Shelly Najjar. Thank you. Okay, so here we go. Shelly Najjar is a nutrition mindset coach, helping women with a lot going on to care for themselves while reaching their goals. Her speciality is addressing the why and how we eat, blending mindset and practical tips to make nutrition and self-care easier. She draws on thousands of hours of training and experience as a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and certified intuitive eating counselor with a master's degree in public health nutrition. Shelly is passionate about helping women realize it's possible for them to have a healthful, joyful relationship with food and peace with themselves and their bodies at any size. So, without further ado, welcome, Shelly, to the Body Love Binge podcast.
Thanks for having me, Victoria.
I'm excited for this. And before we get into these serious questions, I've got 10 quick fire questions for you if you're ready.
Okay.
Okay, let's go. So number one, your favorite food?
Oh, I don't have one. I have so many. So the first one that's coming to mind is bubble tea.
Oh, yeah. Is those little things where you suck up a straw and it's like weird tadpole?
Yeah, they're tapioca balls or
Yeah.
pearls, and I love that one.
That's cool. Number two, if you could be an animal, which animal would it be and why?
Again, a tie for like some sort of fish or bird, because if I could have a superpower, it would be swimming, like breathing underwater or flying.
Amazing. Number three, the worst diet you've ever done.
It didn't have a name. It was very short-lived. It's just really I guess the villainization of sugar and bread. Just trying to avoid as much as possible and failing miserably.
Yeah, me too. Okay, number four, describe yourself in 3 words.
This is something that I used to say. I plan spontaneity. I am much more of a planner, but I also have a spontaneous side. But sometimes I feel like the balance of the two is very hard. So I wouldn't say that I'm a spontaneous person. I also wouldn't say that I'm purely like I have to plan everything, because I can be quite impulsive. So I plan spontaneity as kind of that middle ground.
I like that. Number 5, describe food freedom in 3 words.
What? Well, it's a tie between I consume food and I move on. I feel like I consume food is kind of that idea that food doesn't consume me or my life. And I move on is that feeling that I hear from a lot of people as they work with me, that it's just like, oh, I just ate and I just moved on with my life. Like I just kept going, right? Like it wasn't this thing where I just kept thinking and thinking and thinking, or it ruined my day. It was just like, oh, I moved on. So I kind of like that
I love that
as a practical food freedom.
Yeah, and I love how your brain went there, because my brain, because I wrote these questions obviously, would go to 3 random words, but I loved how you form like a sentence. I just found that really interesting. I just love how different everyone is. I would say something like freedom, joy, liberation. But then your brain made a sentence. That's so cool.
Yeah, I guess I was trying to think of like 3 random words and I couldn't. And I was like, oh, well, the sentence has 3 words. Let me check. Yep, it's 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love it. Okay, number 6. If you might not know these, and that's okay, because this isn't everyone's thing. Do you know your star sign and or human design?
Nope, no idea.
That's fine, no worries. We can skip that one. Number 7, do you know your top value in life?
Oh, that's such a good one. I haven't redone it in a while. Just thinking about like what do I want broadly, and what's important to me broadly. Last time I did some values work, um there was a really big sense of belonging that came up, and it's probably still a pretty strong one now, is like for myself and for others, like creating that space of belonging and that feeling of belonging. I know that's not a typical like value when you're talking about values work, like a lot of people don't come up with that one. Um, like integrity or something like that. But like belonging is always one of mine that comes up pretty strong. So I'll say that one.
Yeah. And you also get to decide, right? You get to choose
Yeah.
whatever value you want. Okay. Do you have, I mean, I started off by saying these are 10 quick fire questions. If someone asked me this, I'd be here forever. Number 8, your favorite book.
Oh, I mean, there's a ton that are like super impactful. My favorite fun one, because it just took me by surprise, it was the first one that I had ever read in this genre. It's called Ella Enchanted. I did not watch the movie. It's a young adult fiction. It's a retold fairy tale of Cinderella. And it just opened my brain to this entire subgenre of retold fairy tales, which is now my all-time favorite. And I didn't know it was going to be a Cinderella story. So I was just like blown away when I was reading it, and I recognized some of the elements, and I was like, but this is different. And it just really, it was so, like, I think I was in middle school or something when I read it, and it so changed the way I thought about stories and storytelling and what was possible there, that I loved it. Like I used to read it every year, like once a year. And I, at one point, almost like had it certain sections of it memorized because I had read it so many times. But I love that idea of like, well, I never knew that you could do this. I never knew, like you were saying, that you can make your own rules about this thing, and like you can take a framework and then, oh, there's these elements. And I think there's such a creativity about keeping certain elements to make it recognizable and then still changing it so it's new. Kind of like historic fiction, like when you have certain elements because these are history points, right? And then you redid it, or in a certain way, like the alternative history fiction, like when what if, some major historical point didn't happen or happened differently. I just think that's fascinating when you can take what is, and then you were like, well, let's reimagine this, or let's work around certain things, or like make a different reason why that happened. Or I don't know, I guess I'm similar to you, like, yes, we could be here forever.
So can you just repeat the title again?
Yeah, it's Ella Enchanted. And I'm trying to remember the author's name. I feel like it might be Gail Carson Levine. I'm not sure, and I don't know how to say her name. It's one of those things where you only read it, you never hear it said. I don't know if you have certain words like
It
that
will
too,
come up
but
on Google as well, I'm sure.
yeah, yes.
Oh.
And I think,
Okay.
if I'm remembering correctly, Gail, the first name is spelled Gail.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna look up that for myself. Number 9. Okay, this is also a hard one. Your favorite movie, or one of your favorite movies?
Wow. I'm trying to think of ones that I rewatch a lot. And now none is coming to mind. Like I said, it's not Ella Enchanted for this one. I am not usually a fan of like my favorite books becoming movies. Um oh, I did again, because it caught me off guard a little bit, I think. Um what is it called? It's the one where I think it was a Neil Gaiman book originally. I haven't read it. Um I only remember like the big spoiler, so I don't want to say it. But I'm trying to think of like, okay, well, what was it called? Stardust. I think it's called Stardust.
Oh, cool. I'll check that out too.
Yeah. So it's a fantasy uh, movie, and kind of like a little bit adventurous, magical kind of idea. Um, and it's just got some really like quippy quippy lines in it, and it's just fun. And I wasn't expecting any of that really. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. It was just this like fun sort of movie. I've only watched it a few times, but every time I'm like, yeah, this is really fun. Um, it's probably not my all-time favorite, but going along those lines, like things that just really stood out because it wasn't what I expected.
Yeah. Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. And number 10, what do you want people to take away from this conversation that we're going to have?
I would like them to know that, kind of like this, like kind of like the movies in the book, that it's okay if something catches you off guard and it's bigger than you expected, and that you can have fun and you can enjoy your food, that it's okay to want food, that's a good thing actually, that we want food, um, and that you don't have to wait to have fun and to enjoy your life until you're in a certain body, or until you're eating a certain way, or until you look a certain way, or whatever it is, that you don't have to hold yourself back, um, to enjoy your life, and you will be surprised about how much you enjoy something, when you're not all caught up by your food and your body.
Yeah, I definitely have experienced that. It opens up so much. It's indescribable. So I'm so glad we're going to have this conversation. So the first thing I would like to ask you is, why did you become a dietitian and intuitive eating counselor? What's the path that led you here?
It was an eighth grade science fair project. Um, I was testing the vitamin C content in vegetables, or in, I think, like 3 vegetables, and if cooking method affected that. And so it's like, it sounds very nerdy, and it probably was. But what happened was I was reading basically these old textbooks that we had gotten from the library, to do the research part of the experiment. And I loved it. I loved that it seemed like nutrition was attached to everything else, every other part of our lives. And it's funny how much nutrition science has grown even since then. That was like probably 20 years, 20 something years ago. Um, back when there were still like literally black boxes over certain processes, because we were like, well, we know certain things happen, but we don't know what, but here's the output. And so it was really cool to see, the nutrition science piece grow over time. But what I realized as I got into it, as I got into being a dietitian and learning about dietetics, which is the science and practice of being a dietitian, um, was that it felt very restrictive and rule based, and like, let's shame the patient if they don't do what we say they should do. And it,
Mm,
even with like a move toward patient-centered care, and the patient gets to decide what their goals are, and we're there to support them, not like dictate what their goals are, it's still not enough. When when I was working in the hospital, and it was okay to just write off somebody because of their body size and be like, well, of course they have a problem with this. Like, no, that's not appropriate care. And I also just didn't feel like that was the appropriate place for nutrition education. You have this traumatic medical experience, and then somebody's going in there trying to tell you like 10 high level points, and assuming that you're going to follow up in an outpatient setting, which is like after you leave the hospital. And usually that didn't happen. And you're already either so stressed that this happened, or so grateful that you're alive, that you really don't care what is being said. And you've seen like 30 different people over the course of your 2-day stay. And it's like, okay, this is not the right time. And we would see the same patients come back with something else, or maybe the same thing. They didn't remember that, we talked, and their condition is getting worse. And then we blame them for like not following the rules. We'd call it non-compliant.
yeah.
And you hear a lot of that same thing in diets and in diet industry and in our own self-talk, right? Like, why can't I just do the thing? I should have known this. So-and-so told me this before. I've already talked to a dietitian. I've already looked at this thing. I know all this information, and we just don't do it. And there's so much shame and blame, and I was getting really tired of it. So I actually tried to not be a dietitian. I was like, okay, I'm just going to be a freelance writer. And I became a freelance writer, and I just I couldn't not do it. I couldn't not help people, and kind of trying to balance. And I didn't know intuitive eating at the time. I was just like, well, there must be something different, because I grew up with a lot of different foods. I'm biracial and multicultural. And so, when you have this list of foods that you're supposed to eat and none of your family foods are on that list of foods, and you're like, well, everyone's still fine and these foods are delicious and you're not going to take it away from me, or like healthify it, because that was like a big trend to take your family foods and make them healthier. And for everybody who is not watching the visual of this, I am definitely putting air quotes on. I'm one of those people who uses air quotes, but like, this is really important to know, is like, family foods can be just fine. Any foods can be just fine. Your body knows what to do with it. You don't have to like, change all the ingredients and make it taste not like your family food, in order to meet some nutritional criteria that somebody has decided. You can just enjoy the food, and you can enjoy that connection to your family. And I was already feeling quite strongly about that, even though I had, only a little bit of science evidence for that at the time. And so I was like kind of building my coaching style and my coaching around that piece of like, okay, if I'm interacting with a client or a patient, I'm going to make sure that they know that their family foods, their heritage in their foods, like, that can still be there. And if you're really busy and it doesn't make sense for you to cook everything by scratch and go to the farmer's market for something or other, that's okay. And let's just work around that. And let's just figure out how you can make this practical and how you can do this without driving yourself into super restriction where you're not going to do it anyway. And it was not a great fit for, standard nutrition places. So I'm really happy that eventually I found intuitive eating. I had one instructor give us like a 1-hour lecture on the concept of health at every size, weight neutral care, and intuitive eating. And, to fit it all in 1 hour means you're really high level. So I had sort of known that these ideas existed, but I didn't really know until I got into nutrition and started trying to practice on my own, trying to cobble together a little bit of this like non-restrictive food. And I was considering calling myself like the junk food dietitian, because I was so frustrated at the industry and this idea that we would even call something junk and all of this. And then I don't remember what it was that like I found out about intuitive eating via finding out about the certificate. Actually, I had I was looking for like other training or something, because I was feeling like I just didn't have enough to stand on when I was talking to people about this. And so having that certification program really helped me get a little bit more of the science and the psychology around intuitive eating and how do we do this in a non-diet way. So that's how I got into it, like this path of just frustration, like, well, I know what I don't want, like this is not working, let me try to figure out how to make this work in a better way. And then finding a group of people who already had figured it out, right? And joining with them and then putting my own spin on it. Like I think that's kind of how a lot of people do it, right? Like you already kind of have this feeling like something's not working. And then, okay, you find somebody like you, Victoria, or like me, or like any of your guests, right? And you're like, oh, finally, I can relax. I can just like exhale and not feel like I'm so stressed all the time about this thing. It just feels like, like I said, that sense of belonging, like, oh, I'm not crazy. There is something different.
Yeah. And it's like you and I are giving out permission slips left, right, and center without realizing it, that people don't actually need, but we think we do because of the society we live in. Like, oh, I'll take that permission slip. Wait, it's actually okay to eat a brownie just because I want to eat the brownie. It doesn't have to be hungry. It doesn't have to mean I'm emotional eating. I just want to eat a fucking brownie, and that's fine.
And you don't have to make up for it afterwards.
Nope. It's just enjoying the brownie, because guess what? We get to have pleasure as a human being for no reason other than the pleasure itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's so interesting, right? Like the permission slip idea. I will often tell my clients like, okay, so permission, like, yeah, you can do that. And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. And I'm like, yeah, you didn't need me to tell you that, but it can be helpful, right? Like, yeah, we don't need to hear it from another person, or even like, when somebody says something, I'm like, yeah, that's normal. That's okay. They're like, yeah. And it's just this like, and I've had that happen to me too. Like when somebody is like, yeah, that's okay. That the other people do that too. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. That's right.
Me
I know
too.
that somewhere in my brain, but like it can be
Yeah,
very helpful for somebody else to say that.
me too. That's why I always have a coach. So like when I finish with like one coach, I'm like either signing up again with that particular coach, or I'm like, right, okay, cool. I want to learn from someone different, and I'm going to invest this much in myself, because we all need a mirror. I mean, I'm lucky that my husband is also a great mirror, but that can be too close sometimes. You need someone to mirror back to you, to reassure you, to hold your hand, to call you out on your own bullshit,
Mhm.
all of that. So that's why I'm a coach, because it's life changing.
Yes.
Okay.
I often say that it's a mirror and a window, because you can reflect, right? But it also allows you to see into yourself about things that you might not have seen. Like it's both reflective and, I don't know what that word is, like to look
Yeah.
into, right?
I love that, because yeah, it's both and. I always work from the premise of it's not either or, it's both and people are like, whoa, I don't have to choose. I'm like, no, you get to have it all. And this is how you get to have it all. It's just like a perception shift and all of that. So I would love to go into the question of how can someone who wants to make more nourishing choices for their physical body without falling back into diet mentality, how can we do that?
Yes. And that's always the question, right? And it really depends. I'm going to say this first and then I'll give you like the official answer. Well, this is my official answer. My official answer is you have to start with the mindset first.
Yes.
If we start with nutrition too early, even if it's gentle nutrition, it just becomes another diet. And I think you've had guests that say the same thing. You say the same thing, right? Like I think most of the people who are trained in intuitive eating or in this non-diet approach will say the same thing unless they're going rogue. You have to start with the mindset. You have to readjust, relearn the way that you are interacting with your food, right? That relationship with your food and your body and yourself first. That gives you the foundation to build everything else on. So once you do that, and so if you're listening and you're not there, and it doesn't have to be 100% there, but if you're still really stuck into diet culture, when we start talking or when you hear somebody talking about the nutrition piece, even if it's an intuitive eating podcast, even if it's like a binge recovery podcast or whatever, take that knowing that that is like step 3, right?
Yeah.
And you will maybe on step 1 or 2.
Yes.
So knowing that and giving yourself the grace and letting yourself have that like release of the burden of trying to do this now. And I would say also, like, if you've been very into diet culture, working with a professional is incredibly helpful and supportive. There's ways that makes it affordable. If you can't, then get the workbook or something like that, because it's really easy, especially if you've always been trained to think of the nutrition piece and the nourishing your body physically piece combined with the restriction or making up for it, or that cycle of binge and then restrict and binge and restrict, because your body is going to go back to what it knows, right? And what it knows is this long history of these things. So you can relearn, right? You can reassign those associations, but it just can be just very helpful to have an outside source helping to guide you through that process. And so when you're there, then we can start taking what we know about population level data and helping to adjust it to the personal level of what you're living daily and what you actually like or don't like, right? So if we know, and I'm kind of, let's say, half sarcastically saying this, but research shows like, oh, there's a lot of variety. Like the more variety we can get in our foods, the overall healthier we will be, partly because we get more of those nutrients that we need, right? We get a wider variety of nutrients. If, let's just say, you have some sensory things and you just really cannot at this time tolerate that wide variety of foods, or you're still really in the restriction side of things, and it's really scary to go beyond your safe foods, you're not going to have as much variety. It doesn't mean you have to force yourself right now to eat a wide variety of foods, right? You can do baby steps to that, like maybe even considering like sitting with that idea of like, people might be okay with a wide variety of foods. And if that doesn't feel quite as scary, then you can like, okay, let's go on with that thought, right? And then we can take it a little bit further and say like, maybe someday in the future, I might be okay with a wider variety of foods. And if that doesn't feel believable, then soften it a little bit more, go backwards. So say like, maybe someday I might be okay with one extra food, adding one extra food into my rotation. And if that feels like, yeah, I could do that, I could believe that, then you have a new thought now. And it's still a little bit closer to that goal of the nourishing your body with the variety of foods, right? And so that's kind of how we can bridge that gap. And like in that process, again, not early on in that nutrition mindset side of things, but maybe a little bit in that middle, you can soften beliefs so that they are not so far from where you are right now that it becomes like the cognitive dissonance is so high that you just double down on your position. You're like, no, I could never. So I think that would be like high level before we get into like exactly nutrition recommendations. I would say make sure you're in the right space for it, mind space for it, and then start working your way toward that, right? Using some of those mindset skills that you have, now you can start to say, okay, as I'm working with somebody who can take some of these high level concepts, because you don't, you know, when we're talking about nutrition and nourishing our bodies, there's like high level stuff and detailed stuff. And most of the time, we don't need the detailed stuff unless we are like, we have a certain medical condition or something. And then, yes, I'd recommend working with somebody, right? But for something like, general nutrition, the high level stuff will be just fine. When you have the right mindset, you'll move into the high level stuff. It may be you don't even need it, right? Because people have been eating, human beings have been eating for thousands of years and they've been just fine. And before we knew all these things, I mean, yes, we've learned a lot in the last 20 years. We've learned even more in the last 2000 years, right? So the human race has been going on, and it's fine. So your body will be able to guide you as you start recovering those cues, as you start with the mindset, as you start nourishing yourself in that refeeding process and allowing yourself to eat, that process and moving, like you said, toward pleasure, satisfaction in your food. And I'll tell you after this, because I've been talking for a while, I'll tell you the difference, how I define the difference between pleasure and satisfaction. But as you move toward that, we have research that shows that the more you eat in an intuitive way, the more you're meeting those nutrition requirements, even without trying, like even more so than trying to aim at the nutrition requirements to start with, right? And I just find that fascinating.
I've experienced that in my real life, because I used to be triggered when, this was a couple of years ago now, when food freedom coaches were like sharing their food and they're like having protein shakes and salads. And I'll be like, they're fucking restricting. They've got to be restricting because I don't feel like having protein shakes and salads. And I was judging the hell out of them without even knowing what was going on. But naturally, because I'm just intuitively listening to my body, I want things like protein shakes to add extra protein in when it feels right. I want sometimes salad over something else because everything's available if we get out of our own way. And like you said, have the right mindset and the right relationship with food. Your body wants to feel good. So it's naturally going to give you a balanced diet anyway, if we get out of the way and stop diet culturing everything. So yeah, I feel what you've just shared. But please go into what you wanted to share about the difference between, was it pleasure and satisfaction?
Yes. And I think this is something that people get confused a lot, because if we're talking about, oh, well, I might want that salad, but maybe I think that something else is going to taste better right now. Like, well, but yes, I want that salad. I don't want something maybe so heavy in general, because salads can be quite heavy, right? They can be quite filling. It just depends. And like, if we're talking about the diet culture salad, like where it's just basically lettuce and like
no,
dipped
thanks.
in water, or if it's like, no, it's like this huge filling, interesting salad with a bunch of textures and fats and proteins and actual dressing and like all these toppings and things, and maybe I eat bread or fries with it because that gives it more substance, right? And I feel like really good after that. Or
Mm.
maybe I don't because it's a hot day and I am just like overheating and I just want something crisp and refreshing and light, right? There's something that doesn't feel like it's going to sit in my stomach. And that's the difference between pleasure and satisfaction. Is satisfaction is now and after I eat. So how am I going to feel after I eat this salad that is, maybe this the diet culture salad, and like I feel very pleased with myself? It's not pleasurable, right? It's not satisfying. So it's none of the things.
Mm.
If I eat the fries right now, but it's a super hot day and I'm feeling like kind of lethargic and I just want something cold and I decide to eat a hot, fresh out of the fryer basket of fries, that could feel kind of heavy, right? It might taste good right now, pleasure, good in the moment, but it's not going to be satisfying, good now and after I eat. But maybe that salad with stuff on it, right? Like an actual salad with like interesting things and hearty things on it, but not too heavy, would feel crisp and refreshing and cool and like interesting enough that I feel like I ate something and I actually had nourishment, right? I actually ate something, not just tricking my stomach into thinking I ate something.
Mm.
I actually eat something. And so I have energy. I get some fluids from the foods that I'm eating. And maybe I also pair that with like an ice cold something, right? Whatever drink I'm feeling like in the moment. And that feels really good. And that feels good now when I eat it because it's interesting and it's got textures and it's got flavor and it has dressing and all these things. And it's interesting and it's satisfying after I eat because it doesn't make me even more tired and even more like heavy feeling and slow and lethargic. But now maybe I'm refreshed enough to do something, right? Now
Yeah.
maybe I'm feeling more comfortable in my body.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to go with your, let's say, stage 3, because when I introduce this with clients, it is the latter stages where they've got over the honeymoon stage and they're no longer judging themselves and they're just eating whatever they want and they're wanting to start to feel better physically. I introduce what you've just shared, and I have it as like a analogy, like a table. So you've got a table, pun intended. And when you're making decisions around food, on this table are things like blood sugar regulation, energy, digestion, physical feeling, all of that stuff. What isn't on the table is anything to do with body size, body weight, body image. And so when you're coming to make a decision, depending on what time of day it is, what you've got planned after, what you're doing next, etc., on the table, you can consider, how am I going to feel after, without making it into like a checklist, what you have to go through. It's just a general intuitive check-in with yourself. I've got the gym class later, so actually I'm not going to want that big pizza and fries and a dessert, not because I'm not allowing it, but because I'm going to feel better physically and later. If I have this now, then I'll have that tomorrow. And so it's making a choice from a place of abundance without making it wrong or bad, if depending on what you choose. So I love that you brought that up, for sure.
Yeah, I often describe it. I have this framework called tongue, body, brain alignment, and it's similar, right? Like we have to have that balance between what we want in the moment. That's the pleasure, right? The tongue, it's all about the moment. What, how we feel now and how we'd like to feel after we eat.
Mm-hmm.
That's the satisfaction piece in our body. And then how we, what is the information we know about these things? Because like your schedule, that's your brain is the only piece of that 3 that knows your schedule. Like if you're going to go work out, or if you have a meeting in an hour but you're hungry now, or you're not quite hungry now but you're going to be in an hour but you'll be right in the middle of the meeting, then you have to do something about that now in order to feel satisfied now and after you eat, right? In order to not be so distracted in that meeting, or not to eat like right now a bunch so then you're tired in the meeting. You have to balance that, right? The classic example I give of this is like if you were going out to dinner with your significant other, it's a fancy dinner, your anniversary, let's say, and in 3, let's say it's going to be in an hour, okay? It's your favorite restaurant, very fancy, you love it. You only go there for special occasions. You are dinner level hungry right now, but it's an hour before you're going to eat dinner. You could eat right now your dinner that you want, and then you'll miss out on the dinner at the restaurant, right? Or you'll eat it and then you'll feel so full and it won't actually be a fun experience. You could do that. That's okay. But if it's important to you to eat together and to have that connection over that meal, and the meal that you've been looking forward to, you know, probably all year, and you would like that experience, then you don't eat the dinner now, right? You eat a snack now so that you will still be hungry later for the dinner,
Mm.
and that will be enjoyable, and the snack will be enjoyable, and you won't have to be like, I'll ruin my appetite, or I have to save up my calories, or whatever it is, right? Like you can just, like you said, it's not this checklist. Like, yes, we teach these frameworks and we teach these examples, but once you get it, like you actually don't have to think about it in terms of this, right? Like you actually, usually you don't think about it at all. Like it's just a thing that happens. And from time to time, you might be like, oh, okay, what do I want to eat? Or, oh, okay, this is going to happen. So then what? But it just kind of, that process is so, so practiced that you don't have to go back to like, well, but which piece is on the table and which piece is not, or which part of the framework am I not? Like it can be a helpful tool, especially when you're really stuck, because we all get those days. But it just, it happens so much faster, right? Like it's not
Yeah.
something you have to stop and be like, okay, well,
No
did I check this one? Okay. Am I in the right stage yet? Okay. And
problem.
yeah, sometimes it will be like it's fluid, right? Sometimes even me, probably even you, right? Like we go back to like way back when we like something will just trigger something and we'll be like way back in our progress, but we didn't go backwards. It's all just like it's all just there, right? It's the both and approach. Like, yeah, you can be most of the time in this farther, more advanced stage into intuitive eating. And some of the time you will also be like, you know, 7 when somebody called you some name that has now like permanently etched itself into your brain, and all the feelings and emotions and the thoughts about what you need to do about those things will come back. And, you know, it will change your eating, or it will change that for a little while. And it won't last forever, right? Like there's just this like constant movement through the stages or the processes or whatever we want to call them, like depending on who you're working with, that it's just, that's how it is. And that's okay. It's
I
not like
agree.
you've lost progress.
Yeah. And I love how you keep saying it's okay, because it is. If someone eats and they feel too full and they actually didn't want to eat that much, it's okay. No one's going to die. You're not going to combust into flames. Yeah, you may be tired later. You may feel physically full. It's what you make that mean. It's okay. Self-compassion, forgive yourself. There's actually nothing to forgive yourself for, but if you feel like you need to forgive yourself for something, do that. It's just food. Like the stakes are very low. So it's I also encourage that with my clients, to just remind them that, because as I'm sure you can remember, Shelly, or you've seen it with your clients, we can get in such a dark place where it feels so heavy and it's so bad and it's so wrong, and it's like, wait a minute, it's just food. Obviously it's linked to weight gain and what that means, that's where the heaviness is from, but surface level stuff, it's just food. Your body can handle it, no worries. Just like allow yourself to relax and move on. And that's why support is really necessary at those points, because then you don't drive yourself crazy doing mental gymnastics, hating yourself for a week. You just can get over it like really quickly with the right support.
Yeah, right. And that's what we're talking about, the catastrophizing, right? Like I ate this food and it's going to be forever, or I ate this food and now everything's falling apart. All my progress is lost, because that's what diet culture teaches us, right? It's not like it's your fault for thinking this way because you've been trained to think this way. This is how they tell you to think. Like, oh, you fall off the wagon. Like, oh, I have to work so hard to get back onto this wagon that's moving on without me, and my life is moving on without me, and everything is terrible. And that's what we're taught, right? Like you eat this thing, it's going straight to your hips. It's going like, did you know that it's better to throw it away than to throw it on your waist, right? What's the thing, like it's wasted either way or something like that? Like, oh my gosh, this is so stupid. It's not wasted. Your body will use it. It's okay, right? Our bodies are fantastic and marvelous, and they can figure it out. They know how to use foods, right? We may be freaking out about it, but our body's okay with it. And you're not going to be there forever. Like I think sometimes it's not actually about the food itself, right? Like I think a lot of people in this style of coaching, right, we're always talking about like maybe sometimes it's not about the food, right? It's about something else that's going on. And I kind of forgot where I was going with that. I had a different point, but you know, it's interesting because sometimes it's actually about like how are we interacting with this thing, right? Like we say that it's about, oh, I know what it is. The sense of control, like it just feels so out of control to eat something that you feel like isn't allowed, or in an amount that feels bad, or you did something that you felt was more diet culture. Because especially when we're talking about like more advanced, when we are talking about gentle nutrition and you did want that salad and then you start freaking out, like, well, did I really want that salad? Or was it just like, maybe I'm going back into a diet, oh, what if I actually wanted the diet Coke instead of the regular Coke? Because they taste different. I've heard, I don't drink them, but like, it tastes different in some people. And like, oh, okay, I actually want that flavor. It's not about, I didn't want, something that was in the regular Coke. It was because I actually wanted the thing. That's fine. Diet culture, diets don't own those foods, right? Like, that is okay. It is okay to want a salad. It's okay to want, like, you know,
Yeah.
whatever. That's okay.
Yeah. How can people start to, because I get this a lot and I'm sure you do too, when someone has decided dieting is not working for them, because it doesn't anyway, that's a fact, unless you want to weight cycle for the rest of your life or live in a restrictive eating disorder for the rest of your life, you can't control your body, full stop, end of story. So when someone actually really realizes that and they're ready to start our world, come into our world, start our work, and they have no clue how to listen to their body, what that even means. Are they hungry? Do they just think they're hungry? Are they bored? Are they not? Like how do you help someone to connect to their individualized body and start to build that relationship and that trust between what they want and then what their body wants, and how do you navigate that with them?
Yeah, I think it's probably similar to a lot of other people, right? We may all call it different things. We may have a little bit of different ways of how we make that practical for people, but it depends on why they're not in tune with their bodies and what's going on. Like sometimes people only think, and I remember somebody else saying this on your podcast too, is like, maybe you only think it's in your stomach, right? Like if your stomach
Mm.
feels full, you're full. If your stomach feels empty, you're hungry. But if you're thinking about food early on, you might be hungry, right? If you're impatient in your head and you think that everybody needs to move out of your way and it's like everybody's out to get you, you might be hungry. Or maybe you're tired, right? Like that can happen when we're tired too.
Mm.
It's a lot of like, let's just figure out recovering certain signals. Let's tune in more, not just to our physical body, because sometimes we can be quite in tune with our physical body in some ways, like overly concerned with the physical of like, well, I had a tiny bit of bloating. My stomach made a little bit of noise. I must be intolerant. And you're like, no, you're stressed, or no, that's just digestion. You've just forgotten what actual digestion is like, right? Like that's normal. It is normal to have a little bit of gas when we're eating. It is normal to have a little bit of noise when we're eating, right? Like let's normalize certain things about it. It is normal to actually want foods. It is normal to think about foods, but not obsess about them, right? Like that is, I think sometimes even just re-establishing like what is normal about a human body, about food and about eating, and to give new benchmarks, because sometimes we think that it is normal to go all day without food and to not feel hungry, like that's the goal and that's the normal. And so you hear it a lot about people eating breakfast, right? Well, but if I eat breakfast I'll be hungry all day. And when you ask them about what is hungry all day, they're like, well, I just want to eat, like I'll eat again in like just 2 or 3 hours. And you're like, yeah, that's normal, right?
Yes.
It is not normal to go 8 hours without eating. That is not how the human body is set up. So it's interesting that a lot of our work just looks like recovering the normal, and
Yeah.
how that exactly happens and how, the little tips and techniques and stuff like that, like I'm sure that changes. Um, but and it changes like even within like, I have certain worksheets and I have certain handouts that I use, and we talk about certain examples, and that still varies from client to client depending on where they are and what they need, right? Like, you know, reestablishing your hunger and fullness cues. What are we looking for, right? Looking for those landmarks. I talk about that a lot. Is like, think of it as a map and landmarks, because it's not necessarily, partly because the word scale has been so villainized, I think, but also because having a certain range of numbers kind of sometimes means like, oh, I have to be a certain number, right? There's quite a fixation on being correct and perfect. Whereas if you're looking at a map and you say, well, I'm looking for certain landmarks, and not everybody will notice the same landmarks, but these are things that generally people might say. Or when you're really, really hungry, you might have these things. When you're getting hungry, you might see these things. When you're like not hungry at all, you might see these things, right? And to think about it that way helps a lot, right? And so as I'm adjusting from person to person to person, we're still doing some of those like you, right? Let's reestablish your hunger cues. Let's figure out what emotions you're feeling. Let's figure out how food is functioning right now. Let's figure out that self-talk, right? The mindset piece around this, because maybe that stress is causing you different feelings and like physical sensations than, the food is by itself. Let's normalize eating for emotional reasons sometimes, like birthday parties and celebrations and like New Year's. What do? We all cheer and then we take a sip. Is it because I was thirsty? No, it's because I'm celebrating, right? Like that's how you do it. And so that's okay. You don't have to pretend, you can just sip. And it's just like one of those things of like, I think overall, it's just that we're covering the normal and figuring out what that is. Because a lot of times it's so far from it, but we think we're normal, or we think we're trying to be normal, right? We think we're not normal because we're hungry, and the normal person shouldn't be, which doesn't make any sense because you haven't eaten all day, right? Like it's just.
I love that you said that, Shelly, because it reminds me of my own journey when not eating became so normalized to me. And obviously all the magazines I was reading and all the diet culture shit I was in was like, yay, so like here's how to ignore your hunger and all of that. And then when I would like look at what my now husband but was boyfriend and fiance was eating, I'll be thinking, how is he eating again? He's had breakfast, he's now having a snack, and he's having lunch. And now I'm like, well, yeah, because that's what humans do, because that's normal. But it was so far from my normal. I love how you've just said it's actually just coming back to what normal is, when unfortunately a lot of the world is mirroring back to us things that are not normal, things that are very disordered, but calling it normal. And it's not.
Yeah, is definitely not. And just the relief that people get when you realize that you don't have to try so hard to eat healthy. Like that's just, like I said at the beginning, right? It's just such a like, I'm okay. I'm okay. And that sense of like, you could be okay. You could be okay when you're hungry. You could be okay when you're full. You could be okay when you're overfull, because that happens sometimes. Sometimes we just aren't that great at figuring out what we need, right? But that's okay. That's normal. It's all good. Yeah.
Normal eating is not what previous dieters and restrictors think normal eating is. Normal eating is eating past fullness sometimes, eating a cookie or brownie just because you want to, overeating in quotes. I'm using that word overeating because that means there's an imaginary line what's okay and what's not okay, and I don't believe in any of that. It's all normal and it's all okay because, like you said previously, Shelly, your body knows what to do. And if you're actually very in tune with your body, you'll notice that if you eat a lot in the evening, perhaps you're at a dinner party, whatever, you'll naturally potentially be less hungry the next morning. If your body doesn't need that, your body might need that, and therefore it will send you hunger signals again in the morning. But just to surrender and trust that your body knows what it's doing. It's been keeping humans alive for however many thousands of years we've been on this planet. It's so adaptive. It's not going to die if it's not got the perfect amount of vitamins and minerals in the diet. It's okay. But as I'm on the subject of vitamins and minerals, one of my questions I had for you, Shelly, was what supplements, if any, do you recommend like the general person taking when they're living in food freedom? So perhaps they're naturally getting a kind of balanced diet. Do you recommend supplementing as well? And if so, what?
This would vary depending on the person. So anybody listening, just general disclaimer, this is not specific advice for you. But general information. I would look at what they're eating, right? I think I will tell you the ones that I might recommend for people that I work with, could be a multivitamin specific to your age range. So like if you are, beyond menopause, let's say I work with women. So beyond menopause, you might be taking one that's like, 50 or older, or 65 and older, whatever. And if you're, childbearing age, you might be taking one younger with enough folate. If you are a child, I don't work with children, but take children's one, right? Something with your age range. If you, for certain things, you said general. For me, I live in Seattle. It's not in the right, forget if it's latitude or longitude. Anyway, we don't get the right angle of sun. So for a lot of people here, vitamin D supplementation is necessary, unless they're like really out in the sun for a long portion of the day. And then still, like during the winter months, we may still need it. So conditionally, maybe vitamin D, maybe other supplements as needed for like sleep or for, certain other conditions. But again, that's then no longer general. So I think my top two are probably multivitamin, maybe vitamin D. And then the dosing of the vitamin D would depend on what we're using it for. But yeah, it's fairly simple, right? Instead of having to take like your pile of stuff every morning, or like this thing for this and this thing for this, like I go through, like some people, they want to do that and they have the budget for it. And so we'll go through, look at the evidence for different things. And if it's available, look up certain like specific brands and see if there's any studies out there. But if there isn't, then we just look up in general, like, hey, this doesn't actually have evidence for the thing that you are taking it for. Like, you can still choose to take it. It doesn't seem to be harmful. Or, hey, it seems to be harmful, like in the amounts that you're taking it. Let's maybe reconsider this. But then again, it's that person's choice, right? Like, I'll make a recommendation as a provider, but it's their choice. And if you want to spend your money on something that you feel like might help you, the placebo effect is quite strong. And I say this with all respect, right? Actually, the placebo effect can account for some things. So like, if you're really convinced that something will help you and it's not harmful, great. Like, okay, if you're willing to spend the money and you think it's going to help you and you're not doing anything, like it's not going to hurt any of the other processes in your body, all right, like, yeah, great, like take it, right? Especially if you can afford it, right? If you can't afford it, I might be a little bit more like, hey, there's not a lot of evidence for a lot of these supplements. And so let's rethink, like, because a lot of times that's just another way, like, that diet culture can sneak in of saying like, oh, but you really aren't getting enough. Or, especially if, like, we're talking in the absence of any conditions, right? Then maybe you're not really doing it well enough. Maybe your body isn't quite as good. Maybe our food isn't quite as good as we need it to be. Let's do a little bit more. Let's do a little bit more than that. Oh, what about this thing? It's like,
And
okay,
before you know it, you're down the
yeah,
rabbit hole, spending hundreds on supplements, eating vegetables however many grams at every meal, and it just turns into rules that you hate.
yep,
So
all
just
over again.
before I ask how people can find you and work with you, just from a personal share, I take a multivitamin that has all the B vitamins in to make sure that I'm getting them. I do take an omega-3 because I don't eat oily fish. I'd like it, but we just don't eat it because my husband doesn't like it. So I take that. I take magnesium before bed. And that's it. Yeah. And a probiotic as well. That's what I take. But also as well, say for example, the days happened and I haven't actually managed to get much fruit and veg in for whatever reason. I have these like they're not shots, they're bigger than that, but they're just crammed full of like green juice and fruits. And so I'll take and again, it could be placebo, it could actually be generally helping, but I take one of them when I've not managed to get enough greens in, just to make me feel better, to give my body what it needs. And then that tomorrow's a new day and I'll make an effort to get veggies in. It's just like, it is what it is. I'll do my best. My body's got me, kind of thing.
Yeah. 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 I'll take melatonin sometimes. I'll take, like, before bed, I'll take multivitamin, specific for my age and gender, and I take vitamin D. Mine is quite a high dose, because I also use it for my mental health. And that's usually what I have in my rotation, like my general rotation. I'll take some depending on like maybe getting sick or something, but like, it's very simplified, right? Yeah, and it's just like you don't have to try so It's okay.
Yeah, it gets to be that
Yeah.
simple. Nutrition gets to be easy, it gets to be fun, it gets to be pleasurable. So,
Yes.
Shelly, how do you work with clients? Are you taking clients on right now? What offers do you have?
Yes, I am accepting new clients. For anybody listening, it's July 2023. So I'm taking new clients as of now. I work with clients one-on-one. Occasionally I'll run a group program or something. You can find information about whatever I'm doing on my website. If I like last year, October, I did a retreat, which was super fun. So I do some in-person things like the retreat or other events, but mostly I'm virtual, so I can work with people around the world, as long as there's a steady internet connection. And we go through that process of mindset first, teaching that framework, and like making intuitive eating practical, so that you don't have to memorize like all 10 steps and like all these different things. Like it doesn't matter when you're sitting down to eat. That doesn't matter, right?
No.
Like let's just do tongue, body, brain alignment. You're done. And then figuring out the gentle nutrition, if that's something that interests you, because some people are like, no, I'm good. I don't really care, right? Like it's great to not care. It's
Mm.
sometimes for people who've been caring all their life, like, wow, what a relief to not have to care about that. And then they just go on, right? Like it's fine, because we know that it's going to work out. So yeah, you can work with me online, and one-to-one, and sometimes group programs.
Oh, obviously, I'll post all the links below. And thank you so much, Shelley. Is there anything you'd like, any last words you'd like to leave the listeners at all before we say goodbye?
I just really want to remind you that it's okay. It's okay. Whatever it is won't last. Like if it's feeling bad, it won't last. It's not going to be this way forever. That you can relearn what's normal, and that you'll actually be able to get there. It's not going to be like the someday thing for somebody else, and it's never for
Mm.
you. Like you actually will be able to make it. Hang in there, and you know it's all a process, so it's okay if it doesn't feel the same from day to day. Like your body's needs change, you change, the situation changes, and it's still going to be okay.
Feel that. Thank you, Shelley, so much. Thank you for your time. And listeners, I will see you next week. Much love.